Live in the country, you don't expect that kind of stuff.
I'm not permitted.
No, I want to go.
These are tough questions.
No, I'm being interrogated again and I don't want to do this anymore. Yes, I am.
She vanished in under 2 minutes. No screams, no footprints, no trace. For 4 years, over 6,500 tips have gone nowhere. No suspects, no arrests, not even a body. But today that changes. This video reconstructs the entire timeline of Summer Wells' disappearance, hour by hour, testimony by testimony, and exposes the contradictions buried in plain sight. We're not speculating. We're investigating. We'll show you where the story breaks, who said what, when the truth started to twist, and why certain answers no longer add up. This is the first time the full sequence, from sunrise to 6:30 p.m., is mapped out and dissected in one place. If you've been waiting for clarity, for logic, for the moment when everything finally clicks, this is it. To understand what truly happened to Summer Wells, we must return to the beginning, not to rumors or theories, but to the one place no one can deny, the timeline. It begins on June 15, 2021, deep in the backwoods of Rogersville, Tennessee. Ben Hill Road is a remote dirt path winding through thick forest and steep hills, far from any main road, and even farther from the eyes of the world. No surveillance cameras, no neighbors in sight, no cell reception. At the top of the hill stands the Wells home, a small, weathered house surrounded by 11 acres of trees and brush. Inside lived Don Wells, the father, who was reportedly away at work that day. Candace, the mother, was home. So was her mother, Candace Harrer. The 3 older brothers, all under the age of 12, were inside the house. And then, there was Summer Moon, Utah Wells, 5 years old, with blonde hair and a curious, untamed spirit. She loved planting flowers with her mom and playing barefoot in the dirt. That morning, she left home with her mother and grandmother. By evening, she had vanished. Candace claims it happened in under 2 minutes. She turned away, and when she looked back, Summer was gone. No scream, no footsteps, no sound of a door. Law enforcement arrived quickly and launched a massive search. Helicopters circled. Dogs tracked the woods. Drones scanned from above. Volunteers combed the land. Yet not a single trace. No clothing, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Even the dogs lost her scent just a few yards from the house. Also present that day was a 15-year-old boy named Hunter, a friend of Candace, who had joined them earlier for errands and a swim at the park. How long he remained at the Wells home is still unknown. Another name surfaces, Jody Sue Brown, a neighbor who lived just down the hill. Around 5:30 p.m., she reported hearing a strange, piercing scream. Law enforcement later dismissed it. This is where the case begins, a child, gone in daylight, from a home deep in the woods. No witnesses, no evidence, no warning. This wasn't a playground or a shopping mall. This was private, isolated land where any outsider should have been noticed. And yet somehow, Summer disappeared without a sound, without a trace. So we begin with the question no one has answered. How does a child go missing from an isolated home in under 2 minutes and leave behind absolutely nothing? What follows is a breakdown of that day, hour by hour. Not chasing rumors, following time. Because while stories can twist, the timeline doesn't lie. And somewhere in that timeline is the truth. The timeline doesn't begin when Summer vanished. It begins hours earlier. Between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. on June 15, 2021, 3 hours passed in which Summer Wells was supposedly alive, moving from place to place with her mother, her grandmother, and later, a teenage boy named Hunter. But not one independent witness, not a single security camera, cashier, park ranger, or neighbor can confirm she was ever there. According to Candace Bly Wells, that morning began with a trip to the Holston Valley Medical Center in Kingsport. Her mother, Candace Harrer, had a scheduled appointment to examine her knee. Candace said she drove there with Summer in the back seat, dropped her mother off at the entrance, and waited in the parking lot with her daughter. They sat there, she claimed, for almost 2 hours, in the Tennessee heat, in a car, with nothing to do, no snacks, no games, no signs that a restless 5-year-old was growing bored or agitated. But here's where things start to shift. The hospital has no footage of Summer, not walking in, not being carried, not waiting outside. Not one hospital employee or patient remembered seeing a child. No camera picked her up. No glance, no movement, no moment frozen in digital memory. In a medical facility with dozens of staff and visitors coming and going, Summer might as well have been invisible. Somewhere during that window, Candace received a message from Hunter, a 15-year-old boy who lived nearby. He wanted to hang out. She picked him up. Summer was still with her. And now the three of them, a mother, a teenage boy, and a little girl, were driving through Kingsport together. They stopped at Hunter's house for a brief moment, though what exactly happened there is still debated. Some claim Candace handed Hunter a twisted tea, an alcoholic drink, and joked with him while Summer sat silently in the car. Hunter later said Summer seemed tired, pale, not quite herself. Next, they headed to a Walgreens drive, through to pick up a prescription for Harrer. When they arrived, the pharmacist told them the medication would take another 25 to 30 minutes to prepare. That delay changed the course of the day. Instead of waiting in the lot, Candace drove them to Warriors Path State Park, a large public space with forested trails and a shallow pond known as Horse Pond. She let Summer swim. Hunter stood nearby. Candace filmed a short video on her phone, Summer submerged in brownish water, her arms flailing a bit as she tried to climb back up onto the edge. That video would later be posted to TikTok and become one of the final moving images of Summer Wells. But even here, in a public park in broad daylight, no one else saw her. No visitor came forward. No other parent. No children playing nearby. No ranger reported them at the scene. The pond was silent, still, and unobserved, as if it existed solely for that clip, and then ceased to exist. The video has no timestamp, no metadata released publicly by law enforcement. And while it shows Summer, we don't know precisely when it was filmed. There's no verifiable marker to say it happened that day, or even that week. The distance from Walgreens to the park is about 9 miles, roughly a 10 to 15-minute drive each way. If they had 30 minutes to spare, that leaves barely enough time for the round-trip drive, a quick dip in the water, and a return to the pharmacy. But Candace never described the stop as rushed. She recalled it as peaceful, normal, just a moment to cool off. That version of events doesn't fit the clock. It lingers too long in places that don't allow it. After the park, they returned to Walgreens and picked up the prescription. Then they went back to the hospital to retrieve Harrer. But again, no one at the hospital, not the pharmacy staff, not the front desk, not a single patient, confirmed seeing Summer that day. This now becomes the second major public location, after the hospital and the pharmacy, where Summer's presence is uncorroborated by anyone outside the group. From 9 a.m. to noon, Summer was supposedly in a car, at a medical center, a teenager's home, a pharmacy, and a state park. That's 5 locations. Yet no one, outside of Candace, Hunter, and Harrer, has placed her at any of them. No grainy photo. No waving child in the background of someone's selfie. No whispered, "I think I saw her that day. She is a ghost in the narrative," mentioned constantly, seen by no one. This leaves us with an unsettling question. If Summer was with them, why did no one see her? And if she wasn't, then when exactly did she disappear? Some have asked whether the TikTok video was filmed earlier than claimed, perhaps days earlier, and used that day as cover. There's no hard proof of that, but there's also no proof it wasn't. Candace never provided the raw file or the timestamp, and law enforcement has never released the metadata to the public. That silence leaves a void, and in that void, speculation grows. What we know is that by noon, Candace had returned to the Wells property on Ben Hill Road with Summer, Harrer, and possibly Hunter, though his presence after that point is disputed. He was either dropped off beforehand, or sometime later that day. No one seems certain. Candace hasn't clarified, and Hunter has not spoken publicly since that summer. These 3 hours, from hospital parking lots to park waters, seem harmless on paper, a morning full of errands and heat and boredom. But under the surface, something doesn't hold. The timeline is loose. The witnesses are limited. The story has space, too much space. And the girl at the center of it all is silent, unaccounted for by everyone except those closest to her. By the time they returned home, nothing seemed out of place. Not yet. But this is where the silence began. Before the sirens, before the helicopters, before the endless nights of searching and hoping, there were these 3 hours, ordinary, forgettable, and almost completely unverifiable. In hindsight, they might be the most important hours of all, because if no one can prove where Summer was that morning, then how can anyone be sure where she went that afternoon? By 3 in the afternoon, Summer Wells was reportedly back home with her mother, her grandmother, and her 3 older brothers. The house on Ben Hill Road sat quietly on the hill, surrounded by woods and silence. According to Candace Bly Wells, what came next was just an ordinary summer chore, nothing remarkable. And yet, it became the last time anyone is confirmed to have seen Summer alive. Candace stated that she and her mother, Candace Harrer, began working near the camper, which sat roughly 20 feet from the main house. The task, planting flowers. She said Summer was with them, helping in her own way. At some point, Harrer reportedly gave Summer a piece of candy. Then, according to Candace, Summer asked to go back inside the house to be with her brothers. Candace told investigators she walked her daughter to the front of the house, saw her go up onto the porch, and watched her enter through the front door. Inside, the boys were watching videos in the living room. Candace then returned to the camper to assist her mother, who was dealing with knee pain. She claimed she was away for just a few minutes, 2 at most. When she came back and called for Summer, there was no answer. That, she said, was unusual. Summer always answered. Candace went inside and began searching. She said she checked the main level, called her name, then opened the basement door and looked down. Still no sound. She descended into the lower level and realized Summer wasn't there. At that point, she told investigators, panic set in. This version of events forms the foundation of what happened between 3 and 4 p.m., the final hour in which Summer was reportedly seen. But while the story itself is straightforward, the details within it have raised questions from both investigators and the public. One detail concerns the flowers. Candace spoke in interviews about planting flowers in the yard. However, during the investigation, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation noted that there were no newly planted flower beds at the scene. Instead, they observed potted flowers, plastic containers placed near the camper. This might seem like a small inconsistency, a matter of wording, but in a case where timelines matter, the distinction has drawn attention. Was it simply a misstatement? Or did it reflect a deeper uncertainty about the details of that afternoon? Another point of uncertainty is the role of the 3 boys inside the house. According to Candace, they were watching YouTube and were aware that Summer had come inside. But due to their age, their statements have not been released to the public. We do not know whether they confirmed seeing Summer enter, nor whether they noticed anything unusual during that time. Their role in this hour remains a closed chapter, protected, as it should be, but nonetheless critical. Also unclear is the timing of Hunter's departure. Hunter, the 15-year-old boy who had accompanied Candace and Summer earlier in the day, was reportedly dropped off at his home before the family returned to Ben Hill Road. However, exact timing has not been publicly confirmed, and his whereabouts during this window are not detailed in official reports. To be clear, there is no evidence suggesting Hunter was present during the time Summer disappeared. But the lack of documentation about who was at the house and when adds to the fog surrounding this hour. Candace has consistently stated that she was gone for no more than 2 minutes, just long enough to help her mother with a knee brace. In those 2 minutes, she says, Summer vanished. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no trampled brush, no blood, no scream, no sounds of struggle. The family dog, according to some accounts, did not bark. Nothing appeared out of place. From law enforcement's perspective, this makes things difficult. There are no witnesses to Summer leaving the house, assuming she left on her own. There are no witnesses to anyone approaching the house, assuming someone came in. and there is no physical evidence indicating which of those two possibilities is more likely. TBI agents and local officers scoured the surrounding property. Helicopters flew overhead. Search dogs traced scent trails. A massive ground search was launched. But even with all that effort, there was no sign of Summer, not on the hill, not in the basement, not along the road, and not in the woods. This creates a vacuum. A 5-year-old girl disappears from her home in daylight, within minutes of being seen, and yet there is no footage, no eyewitnesses, and no physical trail. What remains is a timeline, based almost entirely on one person's recollection, Candace. To be fair, Candace has cooperated with law enforcement. She took a polygraph test. She gave interviews. She has never been charged or named a suspect in the case. But the absence of corroborating details leaves room for confusion. Not necessarily because someone is lying, but because memory under pressure is often flawed. Even the smallest gaps in recollection can become glaring in a criminal investigation. From 3 to 4 p.m., there is a narrow window in which Summer Wells disappeared. Whether she wandered off, was taken, or something else entirely occurred, we still do not know. What we do know is this: no one, other than family, reported seeing her enter the house. No one heard her leave. No physical evidence has ever surfaced to confirm what direction she went, or whether she left the house at all. This doesn't mean the family is guilty. It means that the story of that hour stands alone, unsupported by anything outside of memory. In cases like this, people often look for answers in what's missing. But sometimes what's most striking isn't what's gone, it's how little was ever there to begin with. A girl, a moment, a porch, and then nothing. By late afternoon, the hills surrounding Ben Hill Road had grown quieter. The heat of the day was beginning to fade, but the air was still thick. Inside the Wells home, the hours stretched into routine, children watching videos, adults moving between the camper and the house. According to Candace Wells, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And then, at some point between 5:30 and 6 p.m., something broke that silence. A sound that has echoed through this case ever since: a scream. The scream was not reported by the Wells family. It came from a neighbor. Jody Sue Brown lived just downhill from the Wells property. In interviews and statements to law enforcement, she said she was outside on her porch that evening when she heard a sound she couldn't explain. She described it as high-pitched, sharp, like an animal in distress. But not an animal. Her teenage children, who were also nearby, claimed they heard it too. It lasted only a moment. Then it stopped. Jody Sue didn't call 911. She didn't walk up the hill. At the time, she said, she didn't think it was something dangerous. But when she later heard that Summer Wells had gone missing, and when the timeline became clearer, that sound took on new meaning. According to her, the scream came sometime around 5:30 p.m., nearly an hour before Summer was officially reported missing. If her account is accurate, it could suggest that something happened earlier than Candace originally stated, perhaps before 6, perhaps even before the frantic search began. But here's where the story becomes complicated. The Hawkins County Sheriff's Office and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation interviewed Jody Sue multiple times. They also interviewed her children. Despite her insistence that the scream was real and that it stood out in her memory, authorities later said that they found no evidence linking the sound to Summer's disappearance. In a press conference, Sheriff Ronnie Lawson told reporters that they had looked into the report and determined that the scream, while noted, was not connected to the case. No additional witnesses came forward. No evidence was found in the area where Jody Sue believed the sound came from. There were no signs of a struggle, no physical trace of anyone moving through the woods. This official dismissal did not stop speculation. Online forums, amateur investigators, and concerned followers of the case latched onto the scream. To some, it became the pivotal moment, a cry for help, a missed warning, a clue overlooked. To others, it was a distraction, one more variable in an already complex case. The challenge is that sound is subjective. In rural areas, especially those surrounded by dense trees and hills, Noise carries in strange ways. An echo can shift direction. A bird call can mimic a cry. A child's shout can be swallowed by the trees. Without a recording or a second, unrelated witness, there's no way to know exactly what was heard or where it came from. Still, the timing matters. Candace Wells said she realized Summer was missing around 6:30 p.m. That's when the 911 call was placed. If Jody Sue's account is correct, the scream happened at least 30 minutes before that, which would mean that whatever happened to Summer began earlier than previously understood. That discrepancy raises questions, but not conclusions. One possibility is that the scream was unrelated. A sound in the woods. A moment misheard. Another is that it was real, and that something did happen to Summer around that time. But if so, it introduces a problem. The official timeline doesn't account for anything out of the ordinary until after 6 p.m. There is no evidence, no statement from within the Wells home that suggests panic or confusion before the 911 call was made. Candace has never publicly addressed the scream in detail. Don Wells, in later interviews, acknowledged hearing about it, but said he didn't know what to make of it. Law enforcement has not changed their position. This creates a familiar problem in missing persons cases. A single detail, unverifiable but emotionally powerful, becomes a symbol. In the absence of hard evidence, the human brain searches for meaning, and the scream, whether real or misremembered, becomes that meaning for many people. But let's step back. What do we actually know between 5:30 and 6 p.m.? According to Candace, she was going about her normal routine. She has said that she checked on the boys. She may have gone back and forth between the camper and the house. The details of those movements have never been precisely pinned down. Summer, at this point, was already missing, but Candace says she didn't realize that yet. She believed her daughter was inside, playing. From the perspective of law enforcement, there's nothing in the record, no call, no text, no witness, to confirm exactly what anyone was doing in that 30-minute window. The timeline is constructed almost entirely from memory. This matters because 5:30 to 6 is the bridge between the last time Summer was claimed to be seen and the moment when the alarm was finally raised. If there was a scream, and if it was Summer, then that window becomes the true point of disappearance. If there was no scream, or if it was unrelated, then the timeline holds, but still offers no answers. And so the scream becomes something else. Not just a sound, but a metaphor for the case itself, fleeting, confusing, and unresolved. It's there, and then it isn't. Reported, then dismissed. Felt, but never confirmed. In the end, we are left with a child who vanished and a noise no one can explain. Whether the two are connected, we may never know. But in that half hour, as daylight faded and the hills stood quiet, something may have happened that changed everything, and no one saw it. At 6 p.m. on June 15, 2021, the Wells residence appeared undisturbed from the outside. Yet, according to the mother Candace Bly, this was the point at which she began to sense that something was wrong. She later told investigators that she had returned to the house after assisting her mother briefly near the camper, expecting to find her daughter Summer inside. When she called for Summer, there was no answer. Candace claimed she then asked her 3 sons about Summer's whereabouts. They reportedly told her that their sister had gone downstairs to play. Candace proceeded to open the basement door, called out, and after receiving no response, descended the stairs. Summer was not there. This moment marked what Candace described as the beginning of panic. However, the timeline from this point becomes highly problematic. The 911 call reporting Summer's disappearance was not placed until 6:26 p.m. This creates a minimum 20 to 25-minute gap during which no publicly available record exists to document what occurred. There are no known calls to neighbors, no text messages retrieved, and no witness accounts confirming visible search efforts within this window. While it is plausible that Candace spent the time searching the house and surrounding yard, this has never been confirmed or described in detail by law enforcement. Don Wells, Summer's father, has stated in interviews that he was at work and only learned of the situation later. suggesting that he was not contacted during this initial window. If any calls were made to him prior to police involvement, they have not been disclosed. The most fundamental concern for investigators is the lack of corroboration for Candace's account during this time frame. No independent witness has confirmed seeing Summer re-enter the house prior to this window. The three boys inside, all minors, have not provided public statements, and their interviews have been sealed due to their age. Media sources report that none of them saw Summer leave the home or heard anything unusual. If accurate, this means no one visually confirmed Summer's presence inside the home at or after 6 p.m., leaving investigators to rely solely on memory-based testimony. The physical layout of the house is relevant here. The basement, where Summer was reportedly last headed, includes a separate exterior door that opens out onto a steep slope behind the home. This door was reportedly left unlocked. It has been suggested that Summer may have exited through this door, either by herself or in the presence of someone else. However, this theory is undermined by a total absence of physical evidence. No footprints, no marks in the dirt or vegetation, no fibers, no blood, no sounds reported by anyone in the vicinity. The terrain is wooded, uneven, and not easily navigable, especially for a barefoot child. Summer was not wearing shoes at the time of her disappearance. If she had walked out through the basement and wandered into the woods, it is statistically and physically likely that she would have left behind a scent trail or visible disturbance in the environment. Yet the tracking dogs brought in by law enforcement lost her scent very quickly, within a short distance of the house. That loss has been attributed by some to contamination from searchers arriving after the disappearance was reported. But even that explanation does not clarify why no trace was left prior to their arrival. Furthermore, no one saw anyone come or go from the property. No neighbor reported a vehicle on the road at that time. The house sits on an isolated hill with limited access, and a person approaching on foot would likely be visible or audible to anyone inside. Yet there is no indication that the family dog barked. No door was heard closing. No shadow was seen at the door. These are not assumptions. They are the result of direct questions asked by law enforcement and answered by the only people present, the family. If foul play was involved, it would require an abduction to occur within a matter of minutes, in near silence, with no sign of struggle and no noise alerting any of the 5 people on the property. If Summer wandered off on her own, the path she took, how she moved through the brush without injury or trace, and why she would choose to exit the house without alerting anyone all remain unanswered. Perhaps the most under-discussed factor in this timeline is the grandmother, Candace Harrer. She was present on the property at the time, reportedly resting at the camper. Her role in this 30-minute period has never been clearly defined. Did she assist in the search? Was she informed immediately after Summer was discovered missing? Did she hear any calls or movement? These basic questions have not been addressed in public statements or by media coverage. Her silence is not suspicious in itself, but it contributes to the broader lack of verification that surrounds this phase of the investigation. Another unresolved issue is the emotional or behavioral state of Candace during these minutes. In similar cases, the initial reaction of a parent is documented extensively: who they called, how they searched, whether they retraced steps, what they were wearing, whether their phone was on or off. In this instance, the only confirmed action taken during this window is the eventual 911 call. Law enforcement has not released transcripts of that call or detailed the state of the house upon their arrival. However, it is known that officers arrived at a scene that was already quiet. There was no ongoing commotion, no active search in progress, and no clear direction to begin with. This is crucial. Law enforcement protocols for missing children are built around timing. The faster a child's absence is detected and reported, the greater the chance of recovery. In this case, by the time the alert was issued, the window of opportunity had already closed. Whether that delay was caused by panic, shock, or confusion is not for the public to decide. But from a procedural standpoint, it created a gap that will likely never be bridged. Investigators have consistently refused to rule anyone out or publicly accuse any party. At the same time, they have reiterated that all possibilities remain on the table. That includes accident, abduction, and intentional disappearance. What makes the 6 to 6:30 p.m. window so important is not just that Summer disappeared within it, but that no one, not even those closest to her, can firmly state what happened during those 30 minutes. There are no known cameras, no physical trail, no verified eyewitness, and no objective timestamps beyond the emergency call. What remains is uncertainty, not due to speculation, but due to absence. Absence of records, absence of signs, absence of memory that can be backed by evidence. For any investigation, that kind of vacuum is extraordinarily difficult to overcome. By the end of June 15, 2021, a single theory began to dominate early public discussion of Summer Wells' disappearance, that someone had abducted her through the basement door. This theory was strongly advocated by her father, Don Wells. In the days and weeks following the event, Don publicly stated his belief that an unknown individual entered the property, accessed the home from the rear, and took Summer without leaving a trace. He emphasized that the basement door was frequently left unlocked and that it opened out toward a small trail leading into the woods behind the property. From there, a person could theoretically exit down a slope and reach a gravel road connecting to the broader Beach Creek area. According to Don, this was the only logical explanation for how his daughter could have vanished so quickly and without any sign of her departure. This hypothesis, while emotionally compelling, requires careful scrutiny. First, the physical setting of the property must be considered. The Wells home sits on a hill with limited access from the road. The driveway is narrow and winding, visible from the front porch, and lined by dense trees and brush. The basement exit faces away from the main road, but is still located on a slope that descends into visible terrain. Any approach to that door from outside would require navigating brush, uneven ground, and elevation changes. More importantly, anyone attempting to abduct a child from the house would need to approach silently, avoid alerting the family dog, access the basement door without being seen, and exit with a 5-year-old without leaving evidence of struggle or contact. That would need to occur within a matter of minutes, during daylight, while 5 other people were nearby. It is true that the basement door was reportedly left unlocked. That detail opens the possibility of external access. However, accessibility alone is not evidence. No fingerprints were recovered from the door. There were no indications of forced entry, no smudges, no pry marks, and no broken latches. The interior of the basement did not show signs of disruption or struggle. Items were undisturbed, furniture was intact, and no objects appeared moved or displaced. In standard abduction cases, particularly those involving entry and exit through a confined structure, physical evidence is commonly found, even if only trace amounts. The lack of such indicators weakens the theory substantially. One supporting point often cited in favor of the abduction theory is the scent trail followed by tracking dogs. According to multiple sources, dogs picked up Summer's scent near the basement and followed it down the hill. However, the trail reportedly stopped at a bend in the dirt road. This location is several dozen yards from the house and leads in the direction of the main road. This sudden loss of scent has been interpreted by some, including Don Wells, as proof that Summer was placed into a vehicle at that location and driven away. This interpretation, however, rests on assumptions that cannot be confirmed. First, the reliability of the scent trail is questionable due to scene contamination. The property was heavily trafficked by family members and volunteer searchers prior to the arrival of law enforcement. Dogs rely on undisturbed ground conditions to differentiate and follow specific scent signatures. If the route was walked by multiple individuals after the disappearance, it is possible that the scent track was confused or truncated. Additionally, a sudden loss of scent can be caused by environmental variables such as wind, water, or even residual scent pools. While vehicle involvement is possible, it is not the only explanation for a disrupted track. A second detail often discussed is the reported sighting of a red pickup truck in the vicinity of the Wells home in the days surrounding the disappearance. Law enforcement did issue a request to identify the driver of a maroon or red Toyota Tacoma seen near the Ben Hill Road area. The vehicle was described as having a ladder rack and white buckets in the bed. This request was made publicly and widely distributed. However, no suspect was ever identified, and no link was established between that vehicle and the Wells case. Authorities later stated that the driver was considered a potential witness, not a suspect. The vehicle itself was never connected to any specific movement near the property on June 15. Critically, there are no direct eyewitnesses placing a vehicle near the home at the time of the disappearance. No neighbor saw a car parked on the road. No sounds of engines or doors closing were reported. No tire tracks or indentations were discovered on the dirt or gravel surrounding the home, despite relatively soft terrain in the area where a car might have been parked. The slope behind the house is steep and bordered by trees, not an easy or discreet place for a driver to reach or idle without being noticed. When all these factors are weighed, the abduction, through basement theory begins to lose plausibility. It remains technically possible, but increasingly implausible when scrutinized under investigative standards. The lack of physical evidence, absence of surveillance, missing eyewitnesses, and ambiguous scent trail all challenge the theory's credibility. Moreover, investigators have never publicly endorsed this theory. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has repeatedly stated that they are pursuing all possibilities, but have not singled out abduction as the most likely scenario. In fact, early press conferences emphasized the need for physical evidence and stressed that the disappearance remained an open investigation with no definitive conclusion. The emphasis placed on abduction by Don Wells appears to stem from personal conviction rather than investigatory validation. This brings us to a more controversial but necessary angle: the possibility that the basement door abduction narrative was constructed after the fact to offer a plausible escape route. This hypothesis does not assume guilt, but raises the question of whether the family, knowingly or unknowingly, introduced a theory that gave structure to an otherwise inexplicable disappearance. In high-stress situations, individuals often search for explanations that absolve responsibility or offer psychological comfort. If Summer was truly last seen walking into the house, and no one witnessed her leave, an external intruder becomes a convenient, albeit unproven, answer. The unlocked basement door becomes the focal point, not because it was used, but because it could have been used. In such scenarios, the difference between possibility and probability becomes vital. Just because a route exists does not mean it was taken. A door being unlocked does not imply it was used. The absence of evidence is not proof of a cover-up, but neither is it confirmation of an abduction. What remains is a logistical dead end: an unlocked door, a missing child, a fading scent trail, a vehicle no one saw, a theory no one can prove, all wrapped in 30 seconds of opportunity and silence. Whether this was a real escape route or a post hoc rationalization may never be conclusively determined. But any theory, especially one as bold as abduction through a hidden route, demands more than possibility. It demands evidence, and to this day, that evidence has not been found. The disappearance of Summer Wells has been surrounded by a puzzling silence. Among the most understated yet potentially pivotal elements in this case are her 3 older brothers, boys who were present inside the home during the exact time window when Summer is believed to have gone missing. They are the last known individuals, other than Candace Bly, who were physically near Summer in those final moments. And yet, nearly 4 years later, nothing publicly known has been said by any of them. No quotes, no statements, no testimony revealed. This absence of their voices in the narrative raises a series of difficult but necessary questions. What do they know? Why have they remained completely silent? And is this silence circumstantial or strategic? Candace has stated in several interviews that the boys were in the house watching YouTube when she returned from the camper area. She asked them where Summer was, and according to her, they responded that Summer had gone downstairs. That single sentence, if accurate, is the only known reference to the boys' awareness of their sister's whereabouts on the afternoon of June 15. What's remarkable is that no further details were offered. There has been no information released regarding whether the boys saw Summer enter the house, if they noticed her interacting with anyone, or even if they saw her at all during the final hour. Investigators have never stated when Summer was last definitively seen by her brothers. This is critical because it leaves an ambiguous gap in time. No one outside the home saw her after approximately 2:30 p.m., and there is no verified confirmation that she re-entered the house after returning from the park. The assertion that she did so is based entirely on the family's word. Further complicating the issue is that some early reports, unverified but widely circulated, suggest that the boys may have been asleep around the time Summer disappeared. If this were true, it would directly conflict with Candace's statement that they were actively watching videos and responded to her when asked. No clear documentation has resolved this discrepancy. The boys' timeline has never been clarified, and no official record has been provided of their statements during initial interviews with Child Protection Services or law enforcement. This is perhaps understandable, given their age and the sensitive nature of the case, but it also means that one of the only potentially direct sources of first-hand information remains completely opaque. What is publicly known is that the three boys were removed from the Wells home by the Department of Children's Services approximately 1 month after Summer's disappearance. The reasons for their removal have never been officially confirmed, though Dawn Wells has referenced DCS involvement in interviews, citing concerns about safety and family stress. Since their removal, the children have not been returned to the custody of Candace or Dawn. It has also been stated by family members that there has been little to no direct contact allowed between the parents and the boys since their separation. This is highly significant. While it is not uncommon for children to be temporarily removed in high-profile cases, it is rare for them to remain permanently out of contact unless significant concerns exist, either related to the home environment or potential information they may hold. The long-term separation raises obvious questions. Were the boys witnesses to something more than they could articulate? Were their accounts inconsistent with what their parents stated? Did law enforcement or Child Protection Services find cause to isolate them in order to prevent influence or coaching? There is no evidence currently available to answer these questions definitively, but the circumstances suggest that their removal was not a routine matter. It happened swiftly and has remained in place for years without reversal. The lack of public statements from law enforcement regarding the boys' interviews is also noteworthy. Typically, in missing persons cases involving children, authorities clarify whether immediate family members, especially siblings, provided helpful information, or if their testimony ruled out certain possibilities. In the Summer Wells case, there has been no such clarification. The investigative team has not indicated whether the boys' accounts confirmed Candace's version of events, contradicted them, or failed to produce meaningful leads. The total absence of commentary on their role is itself unusual and contributes to speculation. One potential explanation is that the boys may have provided statements that law enforcement considers sensitive or material to the investigation, and thus are being withheld for legal reasons. Alternatively, it's possible that their accounts were ambiguous or inconsistent, and not yet considered reliable enough to support legal action. Either scenario would justify continued silence from authorities. But from an outside analytical perspective, the fact that 3 eyewitnesses, likely the only other people with proximity to Summer during the disappearance, remain publicly unheard after 4 years is a striking anomaly. There is also a broader psychological and procedural element at play. Children, especially those under 13, may have difficulty processing trauma or understanding the importance of specific observations. They may confuse timelines, misinterpret actions, or be reluctant to speak if they fear upsetting their parents or being blamed. if Summer's disappearance involved an accident or internal family event, the boys may have witnessed something they did not fully comprehend at the time. Over the years, memories become harder to access, and narratives can become internalized or shaped by environment. This creates a scenario where critical information could remain buried, not by intention, but by a complex mix of fear, confusion, and psychological defense. The possibility exists that law enforcement has already obtained all relevant details from the boys and determined that their information does not materially alter the course of the investigation. But absent confirmation of this, the public is left to wonder whether the truth, or part of it, still rests with those who have spoken the least. But in an investigation this stalled, any extended silence should be questioned, not in a way that assigns blame, but in pursuit of understanding what is missing. Ultimately, the Wells brothers represent one of the last untouched pieces of this puzzle. They were physically present during the window in which Summer disappeared. They were old enough to remember key details, but young enough to be affected by family pressure or fear. And they were removed from the environment shortly afterward, a move which has never been reversed. Whether their silence is due to trauma, caution, or legal boundaries is unknown. But in a case defined by vanishing traces, their unspoken memories may be the clearest and last path to clarity. Hunter, a 15-year-old boy at the time of Summer Wells' disappearance, holds a unique position in the case. He was the only non-family member confirmed to have spent significant time with Candace, Bly, and Summer on the morning and early afternoon of June 15, 2021. His presence is documented through photos and video footage taken at Warriors Path State Park, and his name appeared early in the investigation. Yet, despite this, his role in the narrative has remained marginal, surrounded by vague references, conflicting accounts, and limited official commentary. The question is not simply whether Hunter saw something, but why, after 4 years, he has disappeared from the public conversation entirely. Hunter's initial statements came through a single YouTube interview, released by a third party weeks after Summer was reported missing. In that interview, Hunter claimed that Candace had picked him up around 10 a.m. and that they stopped to purchase nicotine vapes and a bottle of twisted tea, which Candace allegedly offered him to drink. While this detail raised serious legal and ethical concerns, it was never followed up with official charges. The consumption of an alcoholic beverage by a minor, facilitated by an adult under ongoing law enforcement scrutiny, should have triggered consequences if proven. The fact that it did not either indicates a lack of prosecutable evidence or an unwillingness by authorities to publicly acknowledge that part of the narrative. Hunter also described Summer as tired and not really responsive. During the trip, he stated that she was lying across the seat in the truck with her head on a milk jug, appearing lethargic and distant. This observation has been widely interpreted in two ways: as a reflection of Summer's fatigue after swimming, or, more ominously, as a possible sign of a pre-existing medical or physical issue. It is important to note that Summer's posture in the video taken at the swimming hole does appear relaxed, but no definitive conclusions can be drawn from this alone. However, Hunter's description of her behavior contrasts with Candace's portrayal of Summer as energetic and normal throughout the day. This discrepancy may not indicate deception, but it does signal inconsistent perception or memory between the two central individuals present. More importantly, there is no verified information on when exactly Hunter left the Wells property on Ben Hill Road that afternoon. While he claimed he was dropped off at his home sometime after the swimming trip and pharmacy stop, no timestamp has been publicly provided, and no surveillance footage has been released to confirm the moment of his departure. This is a key issue. If Hunter was present at Ben Hill Road beyond 3 p.m., he would be among the last people to have seen Summer alive, assuming she re-entered the house at all. If he left before 3 p.m., his observations would only pertain to her condition and behavior earlier in the day. The lack of clarity around his timeline is a major gap in the investigation's public narrative. After the initial interview, Hunter vanished from public discourse. No additional interviews were conducted, and no official statements from law enforcement have referenced him directly since mid-2021. While this may be due to his age at the time of the incident, it is uncommon for a minor involved in a high-profile disappearance to receive such minimal media attention and follow-up. In many cases, authorities clarify a witness's level of cooperation, whether their statements were consistent, and whether they are ruled out as suspects or material witnesses. None of this has occurred publicly regarding Hunter. His name is almost entirely absent from police updates, news coverage, and family commentary, except for one notable exception, Candace Bly. Candace has referred to Hunter as a liar on multiple occasions. She disputes his version of events, particularly regarding the alcohol and Summer's behavior. However, she has not provided evidence to refute his claims. No photos, receipts, or phone logs have been released to disprove what he said. Her accusations appear emotional rather than fact-based, and without supporting documentation. Her statement does not negate Hunter's account. The fact that both individuals offer contradictory narratives without corroboration means that neither can be fully verified or dismissed. This creates a dangerous ambiguity, one that should have been resolved through formal investigation or testimony. There is also the question of Hunter's relationship with Candace and the family. Why was a 15-year-old boy spending extended unsupervised time with a mother of 4 and her young daughter? What was the nature of their communication? How frequently? Did he visit the Wells property before that day? These questions have never been answered, yet they are vital in understanding the dynamics of the household and any potential risk factors. It is not uncommon in missing child cases for secondary relationships, friendships, romantic entanglements, or dependencies to play indirect but influential roles in events leading up to the disappearance. To dismiss Hunter's presence as merely incidental is to ignore the possibility that his observations, relationships, or emotional involvement may have relevance. If law enforcement interviewed Hunter formally, the details of that conversation have never been released. Nor has there been any indication as to whether his phone was forensically examined, his movements tracked, or his story cross-referenced with surveillance or digital records. In most investigations of this scale, especially involving a minor witness with direct access to the victim, such steps are procedural. Their absence from public reports may be due to privacy laws, or they may reflect a deeper uncertainty about Hunter's role. What is undeniable is that his version of events introduced key details: alcohol, fatigue, mood shifts, contradictions, which were not previously included in the Wells family's timeline. And those details, while not conclusive on their own, suggest that Hunter either saw something he wasn't supposed to, or that his account was deemed too inconsistent to pursue publicly. There is also a broader possibility that cannot be ignored. Hunter may have withdrawn from public life out of fear or confusion. If he witnessed something suspicious or contradictory to the family's version, he may have felt unsafe revealing it. He was a teenager caught in a national case, unprepared for the legal, emotional, and social consequences of being tied to a missing child investigation. His silence may reflect not guilt, but survival. It is also possible that he was told to stay quiet, or that his family sought legal protection to keep him out of the spotlight. Either scenario fits within the behavior patterns seen in past cases, where peripheral witnesses were later identified as crucial. Finally, it is worth asking why a figure as central as Hunter was allowed to exit the narrative so quickly. In a case with so many unknowns, where the last hours of the day remain in dispute, it is surprising that law enforcement did not make public appeals for follow-up, clarification, or verification of his whereabouts. Hunter may or may not hold the key to what happened that day, but his early inclusion, his detailed but unverified statements, his rapid disappearance from the media, and the lack of formal rebuttal all point to one undeniable fact: his role remains unresolved. If truth exists in this case, it is scattered across fragments, and Hunter holds one of them. By early 2022, more than 6,500 leads had been submitted in the case of Summer Wells. Thousands of tips, names, sightings, theories, and locations poured into the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the months following her disappearance. Volunteers, search teams, and law enforcement personnel combed through terrain that spanned over 4.6 square miles. More than 3,000 separate data points, including physical soil samples, footprints, GPS logs, and scent tracking, were collected, cataloged, and cross-referenced. And yet, despite the scale of this effort, the result remains the same. Not a single piece of physical evidence has been found to confirm what happened to Summer Wells. The scope of the search was unprecedented in the region. Aerial drones equipped with heat sensors scanned the forest canopy. Search dogs trained in scent tracking, cadaver detection, and ground disturbance were deployed repeatedly. Helicopters circled the Ben Hill Road area and surrounding woodland. Dive teams were sent into nearby lakes, wells, and storm drains. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder across fields, ridgelines, and ravines. Trails, caves, and abandoned structures were explored. At the time, local officials described the search as the largest and most exhaustive in Hawkins County history. But the net brought back nothing. No clothing believed to belong to Summer was discovered. No shoes, no toys, no hair ties, no blood, no DNA, no scraps of fabric or broken jewelry, no disturbed soil or shallow graves, no tire marks, no trace. This near total absence of evidence is statistically rare in missing child investigations. In most cases, even when the outcome is tragic, investigators can recover something: a footprint, a scent trail, a discarded item, or fibers consistent with the child's known belongings. In the case of Summer Wells, not even a partial confirmation has surfaced. The forensic silence is, in itself, deeply unusual. Law enforcement agencies have remained guarded in their public statements. The FBI assigned its child abduction rapid deployment team early in the case. The TBI issued over 20 formal updates in the first 6 months. Yet none of these updates included mention of a suspect, a theory, or even a person of interest. Every press conference ended with the same phrase: all possibilities remain on the table. This broad language, while standard procedure, also reflects a fundamental lack of direction. To date, no arrests have been made. No one has been publicly ruled in or out. No timeline has been confirmed by law enforcement. The result is an investigation without a center. Such ambiguity has led to two dominant interpretations. The first is that the case is unusually complex, perhaps involving a sophisticated actor, an unpredictable chain of events, or errors in the initial response. The second is more disturbing, that someone deliberately erased evidence before law enforcement could act. This possibility does not require a conspiracy, only opportunity. If someone close to Summer knew the timing of law enforcement's arrival and had access to the scene before it was secured, it is conceivable that objects could be removed, terrain cleaned, or narratives aligned. The remoteness of the Wells property, no neighbors, no surveillance cameras, poor cell coverage, makes such a scenario physically plausible. It is important to note that the TBI has expressed frustration with the volume of misinformation and speculation circulating online. This has, at times, impeded the investigation. But it also highlights a key issue. In the absence of facts, theories rush in to fill the vacuum. That vacuum exists because, despite every available search resource being deployed, nothing material has been found. Not even a definitive last known location for Summer has been established by external validation. Law enforcement has not ruled out foul play, accident, or abduction. Nor have they confirmed any of them. 4 years into the case, they remain without a working public theory. This could indicate a highly sensitive internal lead, or it could simply reflect investigative paralysis due to lack of evidence. Either way, the outcome is the same. The case remains open, unsolved, and publicly directionless. Which leaves one final question. Is this case unsolvable because of bad luck and environmental conditions, or because someone ensured there would be nothing to find? Despite years of active investigation, advanced search efforts, and massive public interest, the disappearance of Summer Wells remains unresolved. What makes this case so enduringly opaque is not simply the lack of physical evidence, but the dense web of contradictions, unexplained silences, and institutional restraint that now surround it. As time stretches on, the more pressing question is not just what happened, but why, after all efforts, we still cannot know. The investigation has navigated 4 primary directions: that Summer walked away and got lost, that she was abducted, that she died by accident and it was covered up, or that she was intentionally hidden or harmed. Each theory has been tested, and each fails to fully account for the facts. Wandering off explains the sudden disappearance, but not the absence of tracks or items. Abduction suggests planning, yet no signs of intrusion exist. Accident aligns with the secrecy, but lacks physical traces. Concealment offers motive, but no one has been held responsible. What is left are fractures in logic. The timeline from 3:30 to 6:30 p.m. remains unverifiable. No independent witness can confirm Summer re-entered the house after the swim. No video confirms her presence during that time. No neighbor saw her. No adult outside the family has testified to her location. And yet, her absence was only noticed hours later, by people who to this day cannot agree on what happened during that narrow window. Silence has become the dominant feature of this case. Harrer, the grandmother who was reportedly nearby, has not provided a detailed account. The 3 brothers, who may have seen or heard something, remain publicly unheard, removed from the home shortly after and kept in state custody. Hunter, the teenage boy who spent the day with Summer and Candace, has vanished from the conversation. And DCS, the only agency with private access to key witnesses, has remained entirely silent about what they learned. From law enforcement, there has been no official reconstruction of the final 3 hours, no sequence of confirmed movements, no forensic confirmations, no indication that any person has been officially cleared or officially targeted. In a case of this scale, that level of ambiguity after 4 years is rare. It does not suggest a lack of effort, but rather a lack of cooperation, or a deeper uncertainty, one that law enforcement cannot resolve alone. So the questions that remain are not about guilt or innocence. They are about truth and access. Who was the last person to see Summer alive? Who was with her in the final hour? Who opened the basement door, if anyone? What did the brothers hear or not hear? What did DCS find when they interviewed the children? What was said in those first private moments before the public arrived? These questions have not been answered because the people who could answer them have not spoken clearly or not spoken at all. In that void, the case drifts further from resolution. No new tips, no new evidence. Just a silent house on a quiet hill, and a child whose name is fading from headlines. And what is the lesson? That a case can stall not because it's impossible to solve, but because too many people choose not to remember clearly, not to speak completely, or not to act when it matters most. In the absence of honesty, timelines break. In the absence of accountability, truth warps. And in the absence of courage, from witnesses, from systems, from communities, justice does not disappear. It decays. Sometimes, it only takes one person to speak clearly for the first time to change everything. But until that happens, silence wins.